Antioch was finally theirs, but victory brought no rest. In early 1098, the Crusader army turned south, toward Jerusalem. They left behind broken walls, mass graves, and the illusion that the worst was over. The road ahead was merciless. Heat replaced hunger. Dust replaced blood. Supplies were scarce. Allies were uncertain. And unity was fragile. Some followed out of faith. Others marched out of fear, pride, or the simple belief that turning back was no longer possible. Every step south carried them farther from home, and closer to the city they believed God Himself demanded. Jerusalem still lay far ahead, and the hardest trials of the crusade had not yet begun. The march toward Jerusalem was not united. After Antioch, the crusade began to split. Some leaders pressed south, driven by vows they could no longer delay. Others lingered, claiming cities, arguing over power, and guarding what they had taken. The army thinned with every mile. Supplies ran low, discipline weakened, and the dream of Jerusalem began to clash with ambition. Cities along the coast watched cautiously. Some opened their gates, others prepared for war. The Crusaders were no longer a single force. They were fragments, moving toward the same goal. Jerusalem still waited, but now the greatest danger was no longer the enemy ahead. It was division within. The march south continued, not as a great army, but as a thinning column of survivors. The heat returned. So did hunger. Villages were stripped bare, water was fought over, and discipline cracked under exhaustion. Some cities surrendered without resistance, buying peace with supplies. Others closed their gates, watching silently as the Crusaders passed. Faith still pushed them forward, but it no longer burned as brightly. Every mile carried them closer to Jerusalem, and farther from the certainty they once held. The crusade was still alive, but it was no longer untouched, and ahead of them, the land itself was preparing its final test. The march toward Jerusalem was a nightmare. Starvation gnawed at the Crusaders. Discipline crumbled. Men turned on each other. The road was littered with the fallen, exhausted, broken, forgotten. Every step was a battle against hunger, disease, and the violence of their own desperation. Yet still, they pressed forward, driven by faith, fear, and the promise of the holy city. Soon, the walls of Jerusalem would shake. The Crusaders' prayers would meet the city's steel. Blood, fire, and faith were about to collide, and the world would never forget the siege that followed. After months of grueling march, the Crusaders finally saw it. Jerusalem, the ultimate prize. Its walls rose high, golden in the sunlight, unyielding and proud. Exhaustion weighed heavily on the army. Dust and hunger marked every face. Hope and fear mingled in their hearts. For some, the city promised salvation. For others, it whispered death. Yet still, they pressed forward, drawn by faith, ambition, and the dream of glory. The Crusaders could not storm the city blindly. Scouts crept through rocky hills, observing gates, towers, and walls. Every detail was noted: the height of battlements, the number of guards, the position of towers. Rumors and fear spread among the soldiers. Jerusalem would not surrender easily. Every choice, every plan carried the weight of life and death. Supplies were scarce. Hunger gnawed at men already drained by the march. Discipline faltered. Some hoarded what little food remained. Others quarreled, tempers flaring in the dust. Priests moved among the soldiers, offering prayers and blessings, yet even faith could not fill empty stomachs. Still, the Crusaders endured, driven by desperation, duty, and the hope that the city would soon fall. Jerusalem's defenders were alert and fierce. Small skirmishes erupted as the Crusaders tested the walls. Arrows flew, swords clashed, soldiers dragged the wounded from the battlefield. Fear and fury etched across their faces. Every encounter reminded the army of what awaited them: a city unwilling to yield, and a struggle that would test every ounce of their courage. The Crusaders prepared for a full-scale siege. Towers were constructed, battering rams readied, trenches were dug. Engineers and soldiers labored under scorching sun, their bodies exhausted, yet their determination unbroken. Jerusalem's walls loomed above them, a challenge and a promise of glory. Every plan, every piece of wood or stone, carried the weight of countless lives. Soon, the city would know the wrath of the Crusaders. Even among the Crusaders, unity was fragile. Commanders argued over strategy. Disputes over loot, rank, and ambition flared. Soldiers watched uneasily, aware that discord could be as deadly as the enemy. Pride, envy, and fear simmered beneath the surface, threatening to unravel the army before the first blow was struck. Night fell over the Crusader camp. Fires flickered, casting long shadows across tents and weary soldiers. Some prayed, some cleaned weapons, others whispered fears to the darkness. Jerusalem lay quiet, but not asleep. Both sides knew that the coming days would decide the fate of souls, kingdoms, and empires. Hunger, fear, faith, and fury converged, waiting for the inevitable clash. Soon the walls of Jerusalem would shake. The Crusaders' prayers would meet the city's steel. Blood, fire, and faith were about to collide. The world would witness a siege unlike any other, and those who survived would carry its memory forever. The Crusaders moved at dawn. Siege towers creaked as soldiers climbed, shields raised, arrows rained from the walls. The gates resisted every strike. Men fell, some alive, some already claimed by the city's defense. The first taste of Jerusalem's wrath left the army shaken, yet more determined than ever. Inside the walls, defenders fought with unmatched ferocity. Stones rained down from the towers. Boiling oil and flaming projectiles scorched the attackers. Archers never ceased their deadly volleys. Every breach attempt was met with fire, steel, and blood. The Crusaders learned quickly: Jerusalem would not fall easily. Days passed as siege engines battered the walls. Rams struck gates with relentless force. Towers rolled forward inch by inch. Slowly, cracks appeared in Jerusalem's defenses. The defenders fought bravely, but the weight of the Crusaders' determination was unstoppable. Every blow brought the city closer to collapse, and the Crusaders closer to glory. The siege was not without cost. Men fell from exhaustion, disease, and wounds. Hunger gnawed at those still standing. Yet in the shadow of Jerusalem's walls, courage and desperation fused into relentless resolve. Every soldier knew that survival meant victory, and victory meant a blood-soaked path to the city's gates. Finally, the walls gave way. Siege towers reached the battlements. Gates splintered under the relentless rams. The Crusaders surged forward, swords raised, shields locked. Chaos erupted inside Jerusalem as defenders struggled to repel the onslaught. The city, once untouchable, now trembled before the army that had endured months of famine, fatigue, and fire. Inside Jerusalem, the battle became brutal and personal. Narrow streets ran red with blood. Defenders fought house to house. Every corner held danger. The Crusaders' faith and fury drove them forward, but the cost was immense. Death was everywhere, and mercy was scarce. After days of relentless assault, Jerusalem fell. The defenders were overwhelmed. The gates were taken, the walls conquered, the streets silenced by the shock of defeat. The Crusaders had endured starvation, disease, and bloodshed to claim the city. Glory, fear, and sorrow mingled in the hearts of all who survived. The city was theirs, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Thousands lay dead, and the streets were silent but for the cries of the wounded. The Crusaders had achieved their holy goal, but the price of Jerusalem would echo for generations. Faith, fury, and blood had carved history into the stones of the city forever.